You know, I love podcasting. I have since 2006, back when you had to use like a Dixie cup with string to make the thing work. And that's why I'm so excited that we recently moved Mysterious Goings On to Anchor FM to record our podcast. I gotta tell you, I don't regret it a bit. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Not going to lie to you, when I first heard about Anchor, I was a little dubious because I've been doing it the hard way for so long. But I got to tell you, it's very easy. Use a Stripe account. Get sponsors. You're not paying monthly hosting fees. The sound quality is great. The distribution is phenomenal. Friends, download the free Anchor app today if you want to start your own podcast, or go to anchor.fm to get started. Remember, you heard it here first on Mysterious Goings On. Welcome to Mysterious Goings On. I'm Alex Greenwood. In James Taylor's song, The Frozen Man, he tells a story from the perspective of a 19th century sailor who was blown off the deck of his whaler into frozen seas. A century later, his body is found and he's revived, lamenting being a man out of time. Quoting from the song, not singing, I saw my wife and my daughter, and it seems so strange, both of them dead and gone from extreme old age. I know what it means to freeze to death, to lose a little life with every breath, to say goodbye to life on earth, to come around again. Lord, have mercy on the frozen man. Well, that's what came to mind, because during this time of quarantine and isolation due to COVID-19, many have felt the loneliness and also a feeling of being stuck in time, as well as separation and loss of loved ones. Matthew Goldberg's fourth book, The Ancestor, explores the emotional journey of the protagonist Wyatt trying to get back to a life that is familiar. The Ancestor is a brilliant, nonstop thriller that leaves readers in the same haze of desire, uncertainty, and fear as the main character, whose story begins when his amnesia-dazed mind encounters someone who looks just like him. Suddenly, he's flooded with memories of life he is convinced he has lived, but the images take him back to 1898's Alaskan Gold Rush from 120 years ago. He longs for either the life he once had and the love he experienced, or obsesses for a new life that isn't his own. It's a book that makes each of us question our identity, heritage, and fate. I'll tell you, it does for me. So Matthew Goldberg, he's the author of The Ancestor, Slow Down, The Mentor from St. Martin's Press, and The Desire Card. He's been published in multiple languages and nominated for the 2018 Prix du Polar. His first sci-fi novel, Orange City, will be published in 2021. He's the editor-in-chief and co-founder of Fringe, dedicated to publishing fiction that's outside the box. I am intrigued to meet this accomplished author and screenwriter. Matthew Goldberg, welcome to Mysterious Goings On.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to do this morning.
Very glad to have you. I seriously, a lot of writers might cringe if I quote James Taylor along with their book.
James Taylor's great.
But that song, The Frozen Man, that's from about 20 years ago, I think.
I know that one, but it fits perfectly.
It really does. The character is very melancholy because he's been brought back to life, put a peg leg on, new eye, this whole thing. But then he goes to the graves of the people he loved, and he's unstuck out of his own time. He doesn't know whether to embrace this new life or the old. So that's when I read it. So when I read about The Ancestor, that's what blew me away, because while Wyatt, your protagonist, was not frozen in the sea, he does seem to be frozen betwixt two possible realities.
Yes. I mean, he basically, depending on how you read it, if you believe that he was frozen or if you think he's just crazy, but if you believe that he was frozen, it literally was in the Alaskan wilderness where he was hunting for gold as a prospector in the 1890s, and kind of an avalanche kind of carried him away. And 120 years later, somehow he magically woke up.
There's so many possibilities there. I'm going to ask a couple of basic questions before I get to the meat of this. Have you ever been to Alaska?
So I actually haven't. I was planning on doing a book tour there, and then kind of COVID sidelined that. But because it took place in a fictional town in Alaska, I didn't want to be too colored by what I would see. So I wanted a lot of it to still be from my imagination. I did a ton of research, but I thought that would be best for this book in particular, because it has kind of like a sci-fi supernatural kind of element to it as well.
Yeah, I was just here I go chasing rabbits as I do. I was watching over Halloween weekend one of my all-time favorite films, John Carpenter's The Thing, and one of the things that is a major character in that story is Antarctica.
Mm-hmm.
This barren wasteland where these, it strikes me as that this wasteland creates this incredible, blinding white stage.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I find interesting about this one is that you're basically, he's looking back at the Alaskan Gold Rush where there's hardly anybody there really, relatively.
Yeah.
And most people know about the California Gold Rush, the 49ers and all this, but I don't think a lot of people know how dangerous it was for prospectors to attempt to find gold there. So, I mean, it was pretty crazy, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was completely different than the California Gold Rush. The terrain, the weather, bandits, there were so many kind of variables that could kill somebody going to Alaska to try to find it, especially if they were going during wintertime. So, I mean, in the book and from all the research I did, many perished. The few that kind of made it to the kind of high points, like a Dawson City where there potentially was gold, some of them really made out amazingly because there were so few of them that there was really kind of gold to share, until that area kind of became a ghost town. People took all the gold, swept it out, and then basically left nothing. So Wyatt reaches that area sort of at its, just after its peak. So it already has kind of been, everybody's kind of calm, taken a lot of the gold, and he's just left to kind of deal with whatever was basically remaining. And that's where he kind of gets basically trapped in time.
I wonder if this was this spawned. I mean, certainly you were writing this before COVID, right?
Yes. Yeah. 2018. Yeah.
2018. Okay. And forgive me if it's too personal a question. Was this spawned in any way by any sense something happened with you? With any loss you experienced?
Yeah. I mean, it didn't when I started it, but my father passed away while I was writing it. And he was quite sick. My father was 90 years old, so it really was just a lot of things kind of happening towards the end. And so when I started it, he was, kind of going through some things. But I don't think I would have been able to kind of capture the loss and touch on the loss had I not gone through it myself. So the book is really dedicated to him. And even though I think somebody reading it that didn't know him maybe wouldn't see that, for me he's kind of exists on every page, like in every word. So it's really exciting for me to have it out there as kind of a testament to him, even though he was not like a prospector, had any connection to Alaska at all. He just appreciated a good story, and I think he would have really loved it.
My regular listeners to the show know that my grandfather was a writer for 50 years. He wrote Westerns, historical fiction, and I was very close with him. He's one of the reasons I'm a writer myself. And he had passed about 17 years ago, and I had found that he has been making appearances in my work ever since. And I didn't even know he was until I read it later.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was similar. I didn't intend for him to become a part of the book, but I mean, there's an old character. He's basically, it's a little confusing. He's potentially Wyatt's grandson and also his potential great-great-grandson's grandfather, because he sees a man who looks a lot like him and he believes that he is the ancestor to that man. So he meets the kind of patriarch of the family, who's around 90 years old, believing it to be his grandson. So that character kind of became my father a little bit, because there's a lot of scenes in the hospital, and it was really just what I was dealing with at that time. So it kind of bled into the work. I don't know if it would have normally, otherwise. But I think that's a lot of being a fiction writer. You're creating these characters, but real people are kind of forming those characters as well. And I think when it works the best is when it kind of subconsciously just flows into the work and it's not like intentional. I'll have every once in a while like a friend being like, is that character me? And I'm like, no, but maybe, who knows,
Actually, I just tell him, yeah, it's you.
Yeah, sure, yeah, right.
And then somebody stepped back and said, but wait, he's a psychopathic murderer. And I said, yes, I know.
Right. That's
So this goes back. So what other creative influences did you draw upon for the Ancestor?
there was a lot. I mean, I'm a fan of reading a lot while I'm writing and making sure I'm reading kind of in the vein of what I'm writing. So I think with this one, I like to kind of bill it as like Cormac McCarthy meets Stephen King. I think those are kind of the two best, influences for it. So I was reading a lot of Cormac McCarthy and a lot of Stephen King as well. Um, in the midst of also reading a ton of Alaskan heritage and history, and obviously about the Alaskan Gold Rush too. There were a lot of Klondike books that I read too, so it really was kind of an influence of all of those things. And then there's this band I love, Darling Side. They're an indie rock band, and they have a song called "The Ancestor." And the initial idea for the book came, it was wintertime, and I heard that song, and the first line is "Go on, bury me." And I just pictured a man buried in ice and what happens if he wakes up. And the book kind of unraveled from there. So I've been in touch with them, and I sent them a copy of the book. So we'll see if they get a chance to read it. They were really like, that's awesome. They were very thankful that their song kind of sparked this. So we'll see.
It's a great feeling. I actually did a running gag. I have a mystery series, and invariably there's 7 books. There's a reference to a Colin Hay of Men at Work fame song, and then finally in one book, the lead character gets to go on the Today Show, and he actually meets Colin Hay.
Oh,
and
cool.
and I had a friend hand him all the books out of backstage, and he's apparently looked at it very perplexed and said, "Thank you. I'm quite sure it's all in the garbage," but I had to make sure he knew that he influenced it.
No, I mean, look, anybody could be like, I'm such a fan, but for somebody to be like, I put you in the book, or the book was inspired by you to a musician, I mean, that's amazing. I just got a 2-book deal for a young adult series that's coming out next year. And it's about a girl in the 1990s who's very into grunge, who becomes a singer and runs away from home. So Courtney Love actually has a half of a chapter in the book where they almost encounter each other. She kind of sees her in the distance and hears her speaking. So if the book comes out, I don't know. I don't know how to reach out to her, but why not? Like, what is she doing now? Like, maybe she'll read the book.
I mean, yeah. I mean, just tell her it's the whole package. Sorry for the pun.
Right. Exactly. And it's all like as fan service, in every way, shape, or form. So I feel like if she ever read it, she would see herself portrayed in a good light. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way to put that. I appreciate that thought. Thinking back on influences, though, there's S.J. Rosen, a best-selling author of Paper Sun, said this: Jack London on a really dark day could not have given us a better story of loss, fear, and many kinds of, and attempts at, love in the Alaskan backcountry. From the icy opening battle of man versus wolf, you feel yourself in the hands of a master storyteller, and that feeling never lets up. My goodness, my goodness, how do you feel about that?
I mean, SJ's a good friend, so it was very sweet of her to write that. This Noir at the Bar series that I do, and a bunch of other thriller writers. They're kind of all over America. So I've gotten to know her through that. And yeah, I think she really nailed it. I mean, the book is really sad, but it's also very hopeful, and there's a lot of other emotions going on. There's adventure, there's intrigue, there's love. There's a love triangle that exists in the book where 2 men are basically in love with the same woman, and for very different reasons. And as you read it, it kind of changes who you think is ultimately going to be with her at the end. But yeah, no, I was really, really happy with that, which is why I put it on the publisher put it on the cover. Yeah.
Well, how do you classify this, though? I mean, I'm having a hard time here. It's you keep saying thriller, and I understand it is, and and you're a very accomplished thriller writer. But we've got historical, we've got Jack London's name's coming. We got literary, we got sci-fi here. What is this?
It's there's an element in the publishing industry that I don't like, where everything has to be like it's put into this category and it's this box and it's just that. And when my agent tried to sell this book, a lot of the big publishers, the big 5, they liked it a lot, but they didn't know how to classify it. So they didn't know, it was like their marketing person was like, well, we don't know what to do with this. So it made it a really difficult sell. And luckily my publisher, all due respect, loved it for those reasons. He was like, I love it because it's adventure, it's historical, it's thriller, it's sci-fi, it's literary, it's funny in parts, it's sad in parts. And I mean, I think I write thrillers, but I tend to write books that are kind of are a little all over the map and could be classified into a bunch of different genres. And to me, that makes it, when you're reading it, go into different directions where it surprises yourself, as opposed to just a book you've kind of always read. A thriller where, okay, there's going to be, the bad guy's going to be, figured out at the end, and the hero's going to, come up on top, and, all these sort of tropes that we just know. And, my book, it's an anti-hero, and you love him, but you also really dislike him as well, because he does some really, really terrible things as his memories of the past start to kind of reform. So you're rooting for him, but you're also not rooting for him at the same time. And I like to think that I just give readers sort of a different experience when they pick up my books.
I find this refreshing. I do. I don't like the being pigeonholed either, because someone, just back to my work, sorry, but same thing. It's it's thrillers, it's mysteries. But I always tell people, my mysteries are easy to solve. It's the reason you read my books, if you do at all, is because I put interesting characters into mysterious situations.
Sure.
So, but I get people, potential agents, publishers. Well, I don't know, is it a thriller or a mystery? I'm like, it's both. What do you want it to be? And then they think I'm a smartass. But
but there's an element where I think they're almost not sure of what the audience is, so they almost think that they're dumber than they are. And people who are readers are smart. They're already reading books, and they're reading it for pleasure. So you have an actually smart person, no matter what they're reading, even if it's like 50 Shades of Grey, who cares? They're smart enough to like take the time out to read. And I think they're hungry for different types of stories. And it's a problem, I think, with the publishing industry. It's why I'm starting my own press, where we're really looking for things that are off the beaten path and maybe a mix of different genres. And I want it to connect more to Hollywood, because I see Hollywood as trying newer things and not, I mean, yes, there's like big budget stuff that's, like the Avengers, but, indie, video on demand, things like that. There's a lot of stories out there that are really sort of unique and different to what we've seen before, that I'm not always seeing in the publishing industry right now.
Well, talking about genre or aspects of genre, there's a through line of suspense in this book, correct?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Now, how do you get that going? That sounds easier said than done. I mean, it's I've heard the old saw about, well, you're on a runaway freight train, the brakes don't work. That's suspense. I mean, what's your thoughts on that as a writer?
I mean, I think suspense is the most important thing. Suspense and tension is the most important thing, obviously in thrillers, but I think in any book, even in a romantic comedy, you need that suspense. Will they get together? Will they not get together? Is there another person going to kind of come between them? And it's really difficult to do. I heard Stephen King actually talk about how he deals with it. And as he's writing, he ramps up the suspense as you're getting to the bottom of the page. So you want to turn the page. And whether that actually translates to the printed version, I don't think it even matters. I think just kind of thinking that way, always kind of ramping up the tension as much as possible, and sometimes you can give your characters different scenarios, in your head, and then kind of think, well, which is the one that's going to maximize the most kind of, butterflies in the reader's stomach or something like that. It's still going to be believable. So I often plot out I'm a plotter, not a pantser, like seat of your pants. So I plot out all my books, but I always leave room for, flying off the seat of my pants. If, it just comes to me where like, this character has to die and that character has to die because ultimately it's going to make for a better book. And then you sadly kill that character and, deal with the suspense that's kind of created from that.
Yeah, it's a old question of mine. Usually, are you plotter or pantser? In there, you've already answered it. As I get older and get deeper into what I've been doing, I've been finding I'm more of a pantser. I have been finding the need to perhaps outline a little more than I used to.
Yeah. I feel like it just saves time for myself. Like the first book I wrote took about 10 years to write, and it was definitely by the seat of my pants. It became my debut novel, but it just took so long and so many different iterations. And I think I also didn't know what I was doing. I was so new to writing. creating a novel. But these days it's like I don't have the time. So like I will fully, almost like it's a screenplay, I'll plot it out sort of beat to beat, chapter by chapter. And like I'm working on right now the sequel to that YA book. So the sequel to the 90s grunge book. And I spent last week just plotting the whole thing out chapter by chapter. And as you get towards the end, some stuff will change. That's kind of inevitable. But at least then when I sit down, I know what I'm doing that day. I'm not just wasting time kind of thinking of things, So I feel like it allows me to kind of maximize my work potential as much as possible.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I do enjoy it when the characters seem to take me somewhere, but I think the corollary to that, as I get older, and a lot of it probably is frankly due to COVID and an uncertain political situation in this country, all these distressors. Yeah. And I think that a couple of things have happened, and that's what leading me into a question, by the way. I found my attention span has been demolished to a degree. I find it very difficult even to read lately, and I think that, and actually I found out that's fairly normal for a lot of people. People are too on edge; they're too tense with everything. But then, unfortunately, and see, this sounds like I'm making all these excuses that my late grandfather would have been like, "Sit down and put on your egg timer and write." That's what he would say. But I'm having a tough time finishing up. I've got a book that's completely 6 months late, and it won't be finished by the end of the year. It's just not going to happen. It's not working. So I wanted to ask you about that. How are you faring as a writer and a creative during COVID?
Yeah, actually, really great.
All right, we're done.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, it's been like the opposite. It's a way of escaping all this. So like, I oftentimes when I write and I'm really into something, I like leave my body. So I just go away for like 3 or 4 hours. So, I mean, in the height of this, and like I live in Midtown New York City. So at the worst of it in, March, April, May, where like the city was like on fire, For me, it was just a way of escaping all that. I would just go, and I was working on a separate book that I finished. And for 4 to 5 hours out of the day, I had a break from everything. And I mean, I don't have children, so I think that helps too. I think, then I would not have 5 hours during a pandemic.
You would not.
Focus, so I think that's allowed me to do it. But yeah, for me, it's been an escape, and I've gotten actually a lot done. I've just taken about 2 months off. I took just a break from writing, and I left the city and I got a place on the beach and just kind of escaped for a while. So that was really, really great. But then I came back like so hungry to start writing again. Like I miss it. And for myself, like I get a little depressed if I'm not writing.
Yeah.
So I always have to be at least working on something like in my head. Like it's just the way my brain works. But I've heard from a lot of writer friends who've gotten zero done and have been unable to read. And I think like, these times you just have to allow, you can't beat yourself up about it. We're in a really crappy, terrible time right now. And however you get through the day, and give yourself some type of like happiness or whatever is a successful day. And if that's writing right now, that's great. And if it's not, you'll write again. I think to like, flagellate yourself over not getting something done right now, it's just not fair. It's not fair to yourself.
Thank you for saying that, by the way. Not just for me, but I have a multitude of listeners who have connected with me, same thing. Although a few, like yourself, it's their escape valve. And I'm trying to work towards that. It's so funny, you're talking about where you live. I was in March, third week of March, I was supposed to be at a conference in the financial district. Yeah. And it was all the way up to the week before the organizers, the international conference for my day job. We're not doing this. We'll get back to you. And it's just, they moved it to October, and I'll just never forget, we went online, but I still had my hotel reservation open, and I get panicked. There's a notification that, oh, you got $1,000 worth of hotel that's going to hit, day after tomorrow. You better go cancel that. But I think it depressed me a little further, because not only would I have gone to a conference there, but I would have seen several friends who live there. And New York City has this ability to, considering me, and I'm not knocking where I live, Kansas City, Missouri is a gorgeous city, but New York City has a way of just injecting that creative energy into my veins.
I mean, nothing is like New York. I grew up here. I've lived here my whole life. I've lived in Manhattan my whole life except for college. So I'm like as New York as it kind of comes. Like I write every day in Central Park under a tree. Like
No.
yeah, like not today. Today is 39 degrees. So like today I'm not going to do it. But tomorrow should be like 48. So I feel like tomorrow is a good possibility. And then it's like 60s for the rest of the week. So I'll definitely be in the park. But yeah, New York has such an energy, and like, I mean, I love leaving, and I'm a little bit of a country mouse in some ways as well. But I, I think it would hurt my writing not to be here because there's so many lives and so many stories, and there's just, like you said, like an energy that exists here and still exists. I mean, it went away in April, yes, but like if you walk outside now, you know, all the restaurants that still exist have all their, you know, outdoor seats opening and people are there, and like this notion that like New York is dying, and it's fine, you know, like we're going through a period like everybody is, and you know, if 40,000 people left, we're 9 million people, will be okay, you know, like there almost was too many people here to begin with, like it's okay. It's all right.
You know, and I'm such a cliche, but I just everything from the slice of pizza to Central Park, though. I cannot tell you, and not to get off too much on this part, but just can't tell you just how I won't say it changed my life, but just how it changed my perspective when I actually set foot in Central Park.
Yeah, it's the most. I get so much, like it like feeds my soul. And it's always weird for me in winter when I'm not there regularly because it's literally my office. So like I'm there like 3 to 4 days a week, and I can give people tours. Like, I mean, I know Central Park like the back of my hand just because I'm there so much. But it's a magical place. Look, it's a city, like we said, with 9 million people, and it's pavements, and it's, you know, garbage on the streets sometimes, and it could be dirty. And then you go to Central Park and it's just this like woodland paradise that exists, you know, that's a couple miles one way and a couple miles the other way. It's huge. And yeah, I mean, I dedicate all my books at the end in the acknowledgments to my tree. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that. So let me ask you quickly, as we're getting into our final moments here. I know you want to get back to your tree, not today, but tomorrow. But tell me about Fringe. What's this all about?
Yeah, so I mean, we've had to kind of postpone it a little bit. Originally, it was coming out this year. We were going to launch, and obviously, I just made an executive decision to not launch it during COVID, just because why, you know. So what Fringe is basically is we're kind of books off the beaten path. I wanted, you know, do books that maybe a mainstream publisher would be like, we don't know how to market this. Those are kind of the books for us. Almost like if David Lynch wrote books, you know, which he does, but like he wrote fiction books, like that's kind of what I'm looking for. But then also I'm very, you know, kind of trying to plug myself into Hollywood and forge a career in that way as well. So I want all of the books to have potential to become movies or TV series. So we've partnered with they're the script pipeline guys and the book pipeline guys. They've had a competition series for about 15 plus years in the industry. And movies have come out of it, like the Snow White movies came out of somebody who won one of their things. So they've had multiple sort of successes that they fed through a pipeline. So all of our books will be kind of passed through their pipeline, and they have a special Fringe category they're going to do every year. They're about to announce actually the winner of this year, and we'll have a close first look at it, likely to publish all of those winners. So it's a cool kind of partnership that I feel like is happening in the publishing world and the Hollywood world that are kind of merging together. And that being said, we just have to delay everything. So the goal now, I'm thinking, is the beginning of 2022, just to be safe.
Are we looking at strictly aged manuscripts when you start looking?
No, I would like writers that necessarily aren't like a debut author, that have some kind of like, because I think to really have a successful book these days, it's equally the publisher and the writer putting forth that effort publicity wise. So I want to work with people that are either eager to put in sort of, money and stuff to really publicize the book, or just are known sort of well enough. So like, I'm publishing, it's a great author, my friend Margot Berwin. She has these 2 novellas that I'm going to be publishing kind of as one package. And her first book, that came out with Random House a couple of years ago. There was a script for Julia Roberts who was interested at the time. So I want to work with people that have some kind of connection to the industry. And I'm debating now sort of how heavy to put sort of e-versions versus, print versions. I almost want to start really just and get the work out there, because Hollywood could care less about a print version. So to feed the books to like development people I know as much as possible. And then if there's buzz, to kind of build the paperback around that necessarily, to kind of maximize how much money we're putting into it. So there's a bunch that I'm still working on, and I'm almost glad to have this extra like year and a half to kind of get it as right as possible. But yeah, I think it's I think anything in this industry that's new and different, it's like, why not?
I appreciate that. I think it's important because one question I never let an accomplished author escape from the show without asking is where is it all going as an industry? I want to know, please, your take on where it's all going.
It's a hard question. I mean, with COVID, who knows? I think that's a big kind of variable. There always will be people who read and want books, in print versions and e-versions and audio is like doing amazing these days. So I think it'll always be there. To me, I look at some indie presses and they're just doing more like challenging, interesting things than some of the mainstream. So I would think the mainstream has to kind of figure out some other ways to, I don't know, just change things up in the industry. Like, I mean, I'm dealing with something with a mainstream publisher, and I have the movie connections and they want to make the movie. And I'm like, here is this thing, you just have to sign off on it. And it's taking a month right now, where I'm like, just sign off on it. Even if it's a tiny movie, like here it is. And there's all this red tape, and it's just like, everybody should forget that. It's like, you're just trying to make books bigger and trying to get them in the hands of people. That's really the main sort of goal. So I hope that there's like younger people coming up in the industry that are thinking of it in different terms and are kind of changing sort of the stalwart almost ways. But we'll see.
Yeah, and I love that Netflix is apparently not afraid to take a lot of risks on a lot of titles.
Yeah, Netflix, I think, off of a Reddit story, just paid $1 million to authors to make a series off of a short story. They have, they're in the industry, but still, it's like, why not? And Hollywood's really looking to writers, especially novel writers these days, because we know how to tell a long form story. So it translates very well to TV. So all of a sudden, we're like hot commodities, especially because they could pay us nothing, which is a lot for us, and nothing for them, and potentially really get something to come out of it. So all of a sudden, we're like, the unicorns in the industry that people want to compete with. So we'll see.
So am I hearing this right? Maybe Hollywood doesn't treat the writer like something stuck on the bottom of their shoe anymore?
I think they do, but I think, at least for like a novelist, it could potentially really be actual money that could change your life, where that's very hard in terms of a book. Your book has to be like on another level for it to really be that, where Hollywood could just buy up the property even if they don't make it and throw you some money, and like that's like really amazing money. So it's just changed my way of kind of looking at this industry. I'm looking at a book as the starting point, and then almost like the root of the tree, and then what could grow from that. It could be a video game, it could be a TV series, it could be something on, who knows. So I think all writers these days should just don't limit yourself. Like, there's so many possibilities to what your book could become, and like, you never know, you could hit up a producer on Instagram and they could reply. I mean, you have access to people that you never had before. I'm not saying it's going to work, but like, it doesn't hurt to try.
We had Burt Weisbord on the show recently, and he's going to come back, actually. He was a producer in Hollywood of, now, I'm probably a little older than you, maybe not, but there was a movie, do you remember Ghost Story, the Peter Straub novel? They made it into a movie with Fred Astaire and Melvin Douglas. Okay, maybe you don't remember, but Alice Krige, it was in the early 80s. I was a little boy, of course, when it was on, but it was a pretty successful film. He also did a film called Raggedy Man with Sissy Spacek. He was a producer, and we had him on, and he discussed how he produced a lot of stuff in Hollywood, but now he felt that from his experience, and now he's older than us, that the writers were not getting their due. And he viewed himself as being a producer who was friendly to writers. And he just saw that was less and less the case. And so he's retired from Hollywood and now has a successful thriller couple of series going. So it's interesting to me, and I think for regular listeners to hear your perspective on how it is now as somebody young, up and coming, so to speak, compared to Burt, who is kind of doing a kind of a Lion in Winter aspect of his career.
I mean, I think it just gives your career like more arms, like sort of why not, and that's how I've thought of it. Again, it's just like, why limit yourself, to I only write this, like, you could write anything. I know that it's that industry is very, very hard to break into. I think it's even harder than, the publishing industry to break into, which is impossible in and of itself, but to really become a successful screenwriter. Yeah. But the difference as a novelist going out there is you're not just some like random person who everybody's written a screenplay in LA. You're a dime a dozen. But you have a novel out there, it's a physical thing that's actually published that you could like, they won't take the physical copy, but you could send them the PDF connected to it. It just makes you different. And like, I mean, I've gotten the runaround out there multiple times where people love me and then they ghost me and I never hear from them. And then a year later, I have another project and they love me again. So I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form it's perfect. I'm just trying to figure out a good way to bridge the two industries because they're so closely aligned that they should be connected more. You shouldn't just deal with like a book to film person that works at a company that maybe has a connection to your publisher. Like, you should be able to connect all these things and meet these people and, be your own agent for, I don't know. I think it's just like losing all these middle people maybe.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And, writers listening, here's the takeaway right here, I think. Passivity will get you nowhere.
Yes, yes.
Do not be the frozen man here. You've got to create a platform for yourself. You've got to make a little noise. Don't be an idiot. Don't go out there with stuff that's not any good. But when you've got all your stuff together, make a plan and get out there. And I love your analogy, having all these different arms going on, all these different things happening. That's one reason I started a podcast 5 years ago, is like, I want to reach different people.
Yeah. I mean, again, there's so many ways, like here you're in Kansas City and I'm in New York and we're having a conversation. We live in a time these days where there's so many different ways to kind of be connected and have access to each other. I like to think of myself too, like I just hustle every day. I'm just always hustling. I'm a hustler. I'm a writer, but I'm really first like the business end, the hustler. So I'm just always trying to like throw everything at the wall and then hopefully some things stick. And if you do it on that kind of level, when something that you love doesn't stick, it hurts a little bit less. Cause I've had that too, where like a project has kind of fell through and you're like, oh, but then if you have another one that you're working on, you're like, okay, I'm just going to put my focus now on this one. And hopefully that's going to be the one. And the great thing about writing novels is that novel always exists. 20 years later, somebody could be interested in it there's some author I just saw, he's like on my Facebook feed. I think his book came out 30 years ago and now it's going to be a TV series. Somebody contacted him after reading it in quarantine, so you never know.
You do never know. Lee Matthew Goldberg, should we go to leematthewgoldberg.com to learn more about you? And exactly. Do we have links to where to buy your books there?
Yes, there's links to all my books, any press I've done, and any sort of upcoming events that I have, which is not that many because, But you could find out all the information about me there. And
if you're in New York City and you see somebody furtively scribbling into a notebook under a tree, that may very well be.
Yeah. If you happen to be in the 70s in Central Park, it's a good chance with me.
Hey, Lee, thanks so much for appearing here on Mysterious Goings On. I've really enjoyed meeting you.
Thank you so much, Alex. This was a pleasure to do, and I hope you have a great day.
Yeah. Folks, I'll just leave you with this. Lord have mercy on the frozen man. We're all frozen men and women to a degree, but I think we can escape just like Leah suggested. And I suggest you escape into the Ancestor. I'm going to. No joke. Gonna do it. I'm intrigued. It's got all the elements that I really enjoy. Be sure to check out mgopod.com for the show notes. There'll be a link to Lee and probably a book cover picture and a picture of his mug up there too. And I hope you'll check that out again on mgopod.com. So, I'm Alex Greenwood. Until next time, keep reading.